Welcome to Rattling the Stars. My name is Tammy Tuckey, and welcome to my channel and this special podcast interview series. Back in 1999, NBC moved forward with one of the last big television film events that was watched by over 25.34 million viewers when it aired on February 28, 1999, and I was among one of them. A 3-hour adaptation of Lewis Carroll's beloved story, Alice in Wonderland. 2019 marks the film's 20-year anniversary, and who better to celebrate this exciting occasion than the director of the film himself, Nick Willing. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you.
It's great to have you because there's so many questions I have about this film, and there's really not a lot of information out about it. But the way we got in touch was because I found the documentary that a fan had posted. They had copied it from TV that Hallmark had produced, and it was just fascinating. And I sent it to you, and I sent it to Richard Hartley, who I had interviewed in December, the film's composer, and he was thrilled to see it. And you were in the documentary, so it was so cool to see, you at work with the actors and talking about the film itself. So what was like your initial reaction when you saw that?
I looked like a child. Can't believe how young I was when I made that film. It was my second movie.
What?
I had made a film before that came out in 1997 called Photographing Fairies. That came out in London, and it was watched by the producer of Alice in Wonderland, Dyson Lovell, who then asked. They were actually thinking about hiring a director called Terry Gilliam to make the film because he was a very popular fantasy director at the time. But then after he saw Photographing Fairies, he thought, oh, well, maybe I could do it. So I went along and had a meeting. So I was then very, very young. I don't remember quite. I think I was 12. No, I was a little bit older than that, but not much older.
So what was that meeting like? What was the conversation about it? How you guys were to bring it to the screen and make it a little bit different? Because I remember we had a VHS tape copy of the 1985 CBS show about Alice in Wonderland that also had kind of like an all-star cast with it. Red Buttons, Carol Channing, Roddy McDowall, Anthony Newley. So was that a conversation you guys kind of had as to how to bring the story to life, but also really bring it to a new century, basically?
Well, the biggest challenge with that book is actually that it isn't a story. The irony of Alice in Wonderland is that it is one of the most difficult films to make because it isn't a story. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't observe a story structure, the kind of story structure that works best in movies. So we were all very aware of that. And I think our first discussions about the script was how can we make this stay faithful to the book and try and yet inject some sort of through line that carries the audience from scene to scene. The book that Charles Dodson wrote, or Lewis Carroll as we know him, is a series of set pieces. He would make up a poem to tell Alice, his muse, when they were out on a summer's day and so on, or at a picnic. And the book was a compilation of all those disparate anecdotal stories or poems. So it isn't about a heroine that goes through with a particular goal in mind. And it is for that reason that it works so well as a book, and why it was then taken up by movements like the Surrealist movement, because it is a kind of surrealist book. So my challenge was, how do we, and what we came up with Peter Barnes, the screenwriter was called Peter Barnes, and he was a very famous writer. Peter Barnes had written a lot of big, huge plays and was massively considered. And what we came up with was to try and find the common theme in each of the little vignettes. And the common theme in each of the little vignettes was that Alice has to, in one way or another, is asked to sing or tell a poem or whatever, which is she's asked to perform. So we constructed these bookends for the film, where she is forced to, she's having to perform in front of a big crowd, and she runs away because she doesn't want to do that. And then we can go into the book, as it were, as it is written. And in each of those scenarios, we see that she is, one way or another, having to figure out how she's going to cope with that fear, so that at the end she can perform it. And at the end, of course, all the people she has to perform to are the characters we've seen in the film. So that was the kind of little, idea that we came up with.
And I think that really sets it apart, your film, from the other ones, because they play in part to the fact that Alice is bored with her everyday life, but this version of Alice is nervous and unhappy about performing. And I think a lot of children, and I think adults too, can attest to the fact that, sometimes it's nerve-wracking to give a presentation at school or at a meeting. So there's like that connection that you could automatically have with her as a character. And sometimes I guess, they can create Alice is a little bit flighty or just, very oblivious to what's going on. And that's okay too, of course. But it was so interesting to see how she had this thought process and really thought out the reactions and actions she could take regarding, her path on this journey. And so I always thought that was so interesting to have such a strong, intelligent heroine who is so young at 13 years old. And Tina brought such an interesting take to it. So how many people did you audition for that role before finding Tina?
Oh, God, hundreds. Really hundreds and hundreds. And of course, we're in England. We were in England then, obviously, and we were making the film in England. And Alice is an English character. So we looked at hundreds of young English actresses. I must have auditioned, 200-300 girls. And we had these open call sessions, where anyone could walk in and have a go. And it was grueling, doing those things, because it's hard, because you see the expectations of these young actors. And but in the end, I'd seen her in a film in Waterworld, I think it was, but I'd seen her in something else, and she came out of the American casting. There were several tapes collected. Lynn Kressel, I think, was our casting director, who's a very well-known American casting director. We had one here in England and one in America, and Lynn Kressel did the American casting, and she sent us her, and everybody loved her. And I liked her because she was a little bit unusual in her approach. She wasn't a classic Alice, and yet what she was a strong personality. And I think it was Jonathan Miller who actually made the best version of Alice of all time was made by an English director called Jonathan Miller in the 60s, I think it was, or the early 70s. And he said that Alice was practically the only female character in Victorian literature who isn't either mad or set up. Of course, it's not true, but there are plenty of them. But you get a sense that she's the one, more or less, the only sane character in that story, isn't she? And so I like the fact that she could be a very contrasting figure against all these madcap other characters. And one of the things about, by the way, which is very important, is that Alice in the way that we've always done that story of Alice in Wonderland in movies is because we're aware that there isn't a strong story that carries you through from beginning to end. That these are a series of, you know,
vignettes, basically,
vignettes.
yeah, that are all for spectacle and show. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we then what we to keep the audience's attention, and particularly the adult audience's attention, we always cast big, huge, famous movie or TV stars. So in each vignette, you go, oh, I wonder who's going to come up next. No, look, it's Martin Short. Oh, and who's coming up? It's, you know, Christopher Lloyd or whoever it is. So and that's so she, as a young girl, was a very strong contrast to all those big, crazy, big personalities that you see throughout the film.
And that's daunting because you have this, correct me if I'm wrong, $21 million film in production that is basically on this girl's shoulders, at least for the performance of it. Because if we can't believe her, we can't believe what else is going around her, because she is our rock. She is our direction for that film. So when you were filming with her, was she ever, she ever came off as nervous or unsure?
I remember that the difficulty, if we had any difficulties, was that it was a very big special effects, visual effects movie. So there were many situations where Tina was having to perform in a green stage in front of a camera without the person she was performing to actually there, because we would have to shoot them separately on another stage, you see. And so there was this challenge of having to get used to the mechanics of making a visual effects movie for a young girl who you know hasn't had that much experience in that kind of movie, or had none up till then. Had a little bit on Waterworld, but mostly on Waterworld. She was on that boat in the middle of the ocean with Kevin Costner, and so it was a real situation. Most of our scenes were constructed without much there. So that was, I remember having to explain to her, okay, you look over here at this cross on the wall, but actually that cross on the wall is Martin Short, who we're going to shoot tomorrow, and he's going to be standing on a table over there, you know, that sort of thing. I remember inventing a word, which I still use all the time, for the gizmo, as it were, I'd say, this is the Gashpini. This Gashpini, and the Gashpini was any kind of weird mechanical or visual effects system that was too complicated to explain. And so we made fun of it, and we used to have a great time. We laughed a lot. I mean, one of the things I love doing when I'm making a movie is having a good time with the crew and the actors. And so there was a lot of laughter, and that makes everyone relax a little bit, particularly with a big show which has a lot of money involved, huge amount of investment in it, and lots of big stars. It's easy to get nervous, and the best way to cope with that is to have a bit of fun and to play like you were kids. And that's the kind of atmosphere I used to create on set, is, you know, we're all kids having a laugh, and that helped calm the nerves.
And I love that you mentioned the visual effects, because I think this is one of those things where today everything is usually a digital visual effect, and pretty much, I know you had a lot of green screen, but there was a lot of man work done into these things, the props, the costumes, and most notably, I would say, the puppets for the film by the Jim Henson Company. So when were they brought on board? Because Richard said that his introduction to the film was actually getting to see the puppets ahead of time before working on the music, just to see what you guys had been working on at that time. I think he said it was like around 97. Was that around the time you guys started and got in touch with them?
Yeah, 97 was when I started, because we made the film in 98. It came out in 99. But I had a long prep period, you know, several months working, and we had offices at Jim Henson's Creature Shop. That's where our production office was, and I had my own director's office was at the Creature Shop. We had a sort of, a partnership with them. And one of the things, you see, it was interesting because puppets and Muppets were already unpopular at that stage. They weren't being used much. Visual effects and 3D animation was coming in big time. And so that it was considered, but what I felt, because I'd already worked with the Creature Shop many times before in the past in my other work, TV work and stuff, and films, they helped me with various other films that I'd made. What I thought was that the puppets gave it a more Victorian feeling. See, one of my kind of touchstones when I made this film is that I wanted the look of the effects to look as if they could have been done in Victorian times. I know it's a difficult thing to get your head round, but because we're setting this film in Victorian times, you need the kind of effects language of that period, which was puppetry and theatre effects and all that sort of stuff. So at one point, we even create for the Walrus and the Carpenter a stage, and we do a little Victorian theatre in which the Tweedledee and Tweedledum are operating. And on stage is Peter Ustinov and Pete Postlethwaite, two huge actors, being manipulated by two literally much huger, gigantic characters in the shape of Robbie Coltrane and George Wendt as Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So you have this look, and that is the kind of design and visual effects look of Victorian England. So I wanted to use puppets and theatre magic of that period and design it in such a way that it looks as if you had a very, very, had the film in Victorian times, you might have been able to make this film. That was my kind of idea. And I thought that was important because it gave the film a kind of Victorian authenticity. And it gave it a period feeling, even though it was a lot of visual effects.
Oh, absolutely. Because I remember just feeling so transported. It was so unusual in the design and visually, because it was something like I had never seen as a kid before. And it was just so beautiful to watch. And I know that you used a lot of Sir John Tenniel's illustrations as inspiration, because obviously the one that a lot of people know is the image of the Mad Hatter and Alice. It's just so amazing how you can take people into a world and be transported. And it was basically a 3-hour film, right? You guys shot a lot of material, and it was a big film event.
It was at the time, in NBC at the time. I remember when it came out, I went to LA when it was released, and it was on, they put it on over one night. It was a 3-hour. And in LA, it started quite late. I remember that it started, because you know how it works. Well, obviously, you know how it works in America. When if it's going out Eastern and Pacific and time, and Eastern time at the same time, obviously, but in LA it starts at 9. It was finishing at 11 at night, and I remember thinking that was a bit late for kids to stay up. And but what it was extraordinary was that they got 27 million viewers, which nowadays is unheard of, to get that many viewers on a film. Things are a little bit different now, but it was it was just not the kind of, it's not the kind of figure that you get on a TV show. But it was one of those event things that went out. One of the things that did bug me, I have to say, was that it was a 3-hour film, but our film was actually only 2 hours and 15 minutes because NBC put in so many commercials throughout the film that it became hard to watch. It's just a part of the way it works in in commercial television. But so that was the challenge also. I remember them saying to me, oh, you know, you've got to do this. This scene has to be end on a cliffhanger so that people will come back, you know, after the commercial break. And also the film is a bit of an amalgam with Looking Glass. There's a bit of Looking Glass.
Yes. Yes, I did want to mention that too. That's a good point that you're bringing up. And also, I think Richard mentioned that Miranda was supposed to have a song, Miranda Richardson, as the queen, but her performance is just so well played that she does not need a song, is what he said. And I couldn't have agreed with him more on that, even though I think she has a beautiful voice, too. And Christopher Lloyd had a song, and that was cut, he said it was cut around the time that they were on set or something like that. Do you recall this?
That was the 2 minutes we put back in, actually.
Really? Okay, I have to pick up my DVD. I don't know why I didn't think that. Maybe I really thought that was in there originally.
I don't know how, but I remember doing an edit with and without Christopher doing his song. He had a song, which is actually in the book, I think. Yeah, where the White Knight sings a song, and we had filmed him by a waterfall. And we'd gone out and shot in this beautiful place, and it was it's an incredibly sad song, and the whole point of the song is that he's crying, the horse is crying, the water lilies start crying, the waterfall itself is crying tears, you know, everything's, because this is a very, very sad song, but it's nonsense. The song itself is nonsense. So the joke of the song, of the scene, is how the White Knight is apoplectically, desperately depressed and sad about this nonsensical song. It was quite funny. And Christopher believed that you had to do it. Well, we both did. I mean, by the way, one of my touchstones in shooting comedy, and this is sort of a comedy, I mean, you know, kind of a comedy, is that you have to really believe in your character. You can't be pretending to be it. You have to completely live and believe in what that character believes completely, and feel the way that character feels. Because if you in any way show to the audience that you're not taking it seriously, then they won't take it seriously either. So it's what I call full commitment to your character. And we see actually in a lot of films, particularly modern films, how actors don't do that because they feel embarrassed and they think they have to ham it up a little bit in order to make it funny. Well, that's the opposite of what will make it funny, because if the audience don't believe you, if you don't believe in yourself, in your own character, that your audience won't believe in it either. And so Christopher really embraced this character of the White Knight in the song. And in the end, it was so long and so sad. And it was quite late on in the film that I was asked to cut it out.
You know, another prominent thing is, as Americans, we were introduced to cast members who are very well known in the UK. And I guess vice versa, you know what I mean? The UK was introduced to our American cast. So you've got a beautiful marriage of the two. You can't tell the difference, obviously, but everybody works so well with one another. Like that courtroom scene at the very end is just so, the timing is unbelievable, because every time I watch it, I just am so, I can't stop laughing, first of all. Second of all, it's just so well written that you can't look away. You know what I mean? And it's just, the timing is so perfect, and it's everybody. And I think that's like the best part of the film, is when you have everybody you've seen, almost everybody from the film, all together in the same room, all these personalities mismatch, you know, like not like they just mesh so well together. It's one of those things that really stood out in the film to me when we get to the very end, and that's like that's like the most important piece for Alice, when all of that comes together, because it makes sense, it clicks for her. So the way you played it and the way you directed it was just beautifully done.
Well, thank you. I think the courtroom, we did build a set. That set really existed, as you can see in the making of, and that was, we shot in there for a week. It was so hot because it was the baking English summer of '98. It was '98. It was June, and it was one of the heat waves. And we hired these giant air conditioning units because everybody's in their makeup and it's all dripping, you know. And people are in these heads, you know, like the Mad March Hare is wearing this costume and he can't breathe. And he's boiling. People are fainting everywhere. The puppeteers that are operating the guinea pigs, you know, the jurors underneath the stage, they're all fainting. You know, it was just the most difficult scene to shoot, I have to say. And because everybody's so far away, you know, Miranda and Simon Russell Beale was the king, were up on high up. They really were in this, and they were cut off from everybody. We used to have to winch them up glasses of water, and it was difficult to communicate with everybody and get the timing of the jokes and everything correct. That was, I remember thinking, it was a real kind of technical riddle. And the thing about comedy is it has to be felt, you know, it has to be spontaneous. So it was a real challenge to make it feel spontaneous when it took so long. Everybody was so hot. People were fainting. They couldn't breathe. It was a really hard scene to do, that scene. But I remember thinking when I walked into that set that was designed and built by Roger Hall, Sir Roger Hall, as we called him, I remember thinking, wow, this is the movies.
I wish there was more behind the scenes footage that they might release at some point in time, you know, for the 20th anniversary, because it would just be so interesting to hear even more from the cast. I loved hearing from Martin and Miranda and Tina, and it just to see them in that time and place in their lives. I can only imagine what they would say if they saw it themselves.
I know. I mean, you know, it was, the production company was called RHI, which was the company of Robert Halmy Sr., he died sadly 2-3 years ago. I was making a film with him when he died, and I worked with him for 20 years. You know, was very close. We did a lot of work together, and then his company was bought by another company, and then another company bought that company, and then that gets syndicated and farmed off to somebody else, and then people pick up the pieces and they buy some of the things, and the tapes go missing, and they're in some vault, and then that vault gets destroyed. This is how it happens, you know. It's very sad, but I don't know that we'll ever find those rushes. I do actually think I remember who made the making of. So I might actually give him see if I can find him. It was a guy called Brian Fear.
That would be great. I know you feature some behind the scenes photos on your specific website, which is what I used for Richard's interview. And of course I cited you as well, because again, I had never seen anything like that before. You know, how you guys were framing the shots, these professionally done photos of the beautiful makeup and the costumes, because you guys won 4 Emmy Awards for costume design, makeup, music composition, and visual effects, rightly so. So, you know, it playing in part to it. And I'm sure with all of the people who have seen it in that time, it's still something like, if you were to bring it up, I'm sure people would know what it is. And so when I found that a lot of people I knew online knew about it, I was like, thank goodness, because it's my favorite version. And it's just so interesting to see all of the hard work you guys put into that. My gosh, it's just a monster of something that you probably will never see again. You know, at least for, you know, TV.
Well, it was the old days, as we call it now. In the old days, we did things properly. I mean, not say people don't do things properly now, but by properly, what I mean is that I had, I think, 4 months in a studio, in a workshop with 5 conceptual artists. Dermot Power, who designed a little film called Harry Potter. Rob Bliss. These were conceptual artists who are now sort of famous because they've made so many amazing films. But and that what we would do is I'd go in every day and sit there and go, well, what if, I tell you what, why don't we make it look like this? And we would be applying some of my theories, which is, let's try and make this, use all the kind of visual trickery of Victorian vaudeville theatre. You know, they had a lot of smoke and mirrors in those days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And apply that to the film, and can we design it in a... And so they would be churning out designs, and so a lot of them are on my website, but those are the things that I kept. And meanwhile, in Shepperton Film Studios, which is where we shot the film, there was a whole building of artists working for Roger Hall designing sets. Wow. And so we would send our conceptual designs down to him, and then he would use those to design the sets.
And I love that you mentioned a lot of the people who worked on the film who are no longer with us, of course. Gene Wilder.
Gene Wilder was so wonderful. I cannot tell you how wonderful that man was.
Please tell me about working on set with him, please. That would be great.
It was, for me, I couldn't believe that I was working with my hero, because the producers which was him and Zero Mostel, was a film made by Mel Brooks. And that film, for me, was one of the greatest films ever made. And Gene Wilder was a guy I completely thought was the greatest comedy actor I'd ever seen. You know, he did Young Frankenstein for Mel Brooks as well. He was, and Blazing Saddles. I mean, this was the greatest comedic actor I could imagine. And suddenly he's going to come over and play one of the parts. I couldn't believe it. It was just, and he'd rang me up and said, Nick, and I gave him he had my phone number, you know, and he rang me every day. Oh, I've just got to this bit in the script. He'd ask me these questions about his dialogue. He was the sweetest, most generous, kindest person you could work with. And he took it incredibly seriously. He was very professional. And he said originally he wanted to play a more comedic role. You know, the Mock Turtle isn't funny, really. The Mock Turtle is a sympathetic character, is a very sad character. But he's not really funny. And he said, can't you put me in one of the funniest roles? And unfortunately, we were already through filming the movie. You know, it took God knows how many. I think it was 15 weeks we shot that film in. Something ludicrous. It was a very long shoot. And I said, well, the thing about this part is that you've got the biggest heart of anybody I know in Hollywood, which is why I want you to play that role. And he came with that big heart, you know, and we would sit off set chatting, waiting for the next setup for hours, him telling stories. Can you imagine what that's like? Telling stories of how he'd shot Young Frankenstein and Mel Brooks and making the producers. I mean, it was like a dream come true for me. But he died. I mean, there are a lot of them. Donald Sinden, who plays the Griffin, he's so funny.
Yes, he is. I was like, So was he on set with Gene, at least doing the voices, like the actual dialogue with him?
Yes, I did it because I wanted them to be able to react with each other. It's not the way you would normally do it.
Correct. Yeah.
But I had him off set with a microphone. Gene had an earpiece so that he could hear Donald, and so could the puppeteers. So the puppeteers would be puppeteering away to Donald's voice.
You get Gene Wilder to sing 2 songs in your film. It's like, it's just amazing.
Well, that's the other thing. We were supposed to cut one of them because it was one too many. And
Oh no.
well, because this is how it. But then it was so magical. He did it in such a magical way that it was impossible to cut it.
I'm so glad you did not cut it. Yes.
And it's beautiful soup. Oh, it's such a lovely moment.
It wouldn't make sense if you didn't have both songs at all. So, and the meaning behind them.
It does put pressure on Christopher Lloyd, who comes up after that sequence, then singing a very long song. That was one of the pressures on, we had, I think that people felt that they had to lose his song, which was much longer. And so we had to cut that out very sadly. But it did make its way back to another version. I don't know where we get that version.
And also, I would like to mention that Whoopi Goldberg plays the Cheshire Cat, and I think it's like such an unusual selection for somebody to play that role, but it works so well. But she never was on set. She had to do all of hers on green screen / blue screen. And how did that audition process work for the Cheshire Cat and finally come to her?
I had wanted her from the beginning, because when they asked me who would you cast as the Cheshire Cat, I said, well, we have to have the most famous smile in Hollywood, because the grin of the Cheshire Cat's grin is the most famous smile in literature. So I was looking for one of the most famous smile in Hollywood, which of course was Whoopi Goldberg. She has the most amazing smile, that big smile. And but we had to wait because she wouldn't do it. Also, the problem was she wouldn't fly. I don't know if you know. I don't know if she does anymore, but certainly at that time she wouldn't fly because I had a fear of flying, or there was something going on. And so she wouldn't come over to England and shoot it to London. So we had to go to New York to shoot that sequence. At the end of when we finished filming, I had to shoot all the shots which she would feature in, including her body. So Tina would perform with the puppet body of the Cheshire Cat made by the Henson organization, which were manipulating and talking, and she would talk back. And then we took those shots, cut together, and we had shoot Whoopi's head. She was wearing a blue suit against a blue background, but her head was the only part of her that was Whoopi. And then we put that head on top of the puppet that we had shot earlier. So it was quite a trick. And we brought Tina with us, of course, so that she could perform with Tina, even though we had already shot Tina. But obviously we wanted her to react to the real actor, Whoopi. Whoopi was fantastic. I think we shot her for only 3 days to do all those sequences.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty...
It was quite... Well, it seemed there was a lot of, setup time and stuff for each of the shots, but it was, yes, that was in New York. I can't remember, in some studio in New York.
It makes you want to become a part of the film industry, to be quite honest, when you look at that film as a whole, because so many elements have to work to make the film work. And they do. Yeah. Everybody brought their A game. Yeah. And they were all for it. And I do also want to mention, I do love Miranda and Simon's banter as the king and queen. It's just so, because I think like sometimes the king is just put off to the side as a small role, as really nothing prominent. And with them working off of one another, it's like, this is the perfect couple for Wonderland.
He's fantastic, Simon Russell. He's a humongously famous theatre actor, and they were good friends already. And he actually helped her a lot, Simon, because she was like conflicted about how to get comedy out of the character, get the juice out of the character. And we had quite a lot of of intense rehearsals where we tried lots of different methods of doing that. And he was particularly helpful, I remember.
Did you get to keep any costumes or props from the set or anything?
Kept I've got some props, but that I kept a few things, back. I have a sort of little personal collection of items, which I have at home, including the clapperboard, and things like that. But the costumes were all stored away, and they became, I remember them being shown in a museum somewhere at one point.
Have there been any discussions about an official reunion with the cast and with you and with the crew?
No, because there isn't anybody there anymore. That used to be Robert Halmy Sr. died, very sadly, and his company got bought up. So there isn't anybody there's no company that, somebody must own the film, obviously, but I don't know who that is anymore. And so there isn't any kind of effort to do anything like that, which is a shame.
But since it is the 20th anniversary of the film, what do you think about its overall legacy and the people who remember growing up with the film and think of it so highly?
Well, I mean, one of the things I had hoped that would happen is that it would draw people back to the book and to read more as children, as kids. That's the big thing that films like this can sometimes encourage. Most films now pull us away from literature, and kids get, but I'm hoping that, and it was borne out after the film was released, the sales in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland rose sharply for several years. And that's a sign that people are engaging with his work and buying the book and reading. And the most important thing is that we get kids reading and enjoying the nonsensical rhymes on the page and playing with them and thinking about them and using their imagination. Because when kids start developing that muscle of imagination, that mostly actually comes from reading rather than watching movies, then they develop their personality and they develop their creativity. And that's what makes it possible for them to do anything then. Go into the arts, become whatever they want to become in the arts. But it all begins really from reading, interestingly, and staring at those illustrations. So that's what I'm hoping. If there is a legacy, it's that it will encourage more kids to pick up that book.
Are you working on anything now that we can look forward to seeing sometime soon?
Well, now I've been making feature documentaries. And for me, it's become more interesting I've written so many fantasy films and made so many fantasy films that I've actually enjoyed lately making films about real stories and real people. So I've made 2 recent feature documentaries. I'm about to start another one for the BBC. These humongous films that we used to do for television are incredibly difficult to make and very stressful. And I've made so many of them over so many years. I started in 1997. It's been 25 years of making these gigantic films. I've had to take it a little bit easier. So now I'm really enjoying making factual films. But I will be starting to write. I'm thinking of writing another fantasy movie next year I can't tell you what it's about because I'd have to kill you. But it's because it's top secret. But it is a very, very famous character that we all know, but in a situation which you've never seen her in.
Well, so, if you need somebody to play that character, this 23-year-old will be happy to do it.
A little bit younger than that, but anyway.
Darn. Well, no, seriously, I'll even play a brick wall in that film. Please let me know, because that would be even just a joy and an honor to work with such a legend and a person that I have admired your work for so many years. And it's just such, thank you very much for doing this, because, you know, this little 4-year-old had so many questions at the time when she saw the film. So to finally be able to talk to you about it is just an honor. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tammy.